guess I'll wait till my phone says 1 o'clock.
Yeah, you have a minute. Says we are now live.
Yeah, we're just about at 1. Okay. All right, well, we'll get started. Good afternoon and welcome to this session on updating and utilizing your EPA Tribal Environmental Plans, otherwise known as ETEPs. My name is Jeanette Sasick and I work as a project officer in the tribal branch at US EPA Region 9 and work with tribes in Northern California in Lake and Mendocino counties. Willard?
Hi, this is Willard Chin. I'm also a GAP project officer in the tribal branch. I work with tribes in California and Nevada. I also coordinate the ETEP development in Region 9 and report to head on our ETEPs. Sarah.
Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Ryan with the Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians, Environmental Director and Emergency Management Director. And I've worked for them for about 20 years. So thank you. Looking forward to our presentation.
Yes, and thank you all for taking the time to attend this session. I know we have a lot of competition. During the first part of this presentation, Willard and I will be in part focusing on the ETEP update process and the differences between an annual ETEP review and update and what we're calling a comprehensive ETEP overhaul. And we're very lucky to have Sarah here today to show us in the second half of the presentation how Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians utilizes their ETEP as a strategic planning document. And in order to get through all of the material today and leave some time for Q&A at the end, please go ahead and drop your questions in the chat box and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. And lastly, in order to avoid any bandwidth glitches today during the presentation, we'll be turning off our videos during the slideshow and we'll switch them back on during the time that we have available for questions. Okay, so with that, let's review the session objectives. For those of you in the audience that may be new to ETEPs, we wanted to just outline what we're trying to get out of the presentation today. So one is to understand the difference between an optional annual ETEP update and a comprehensive ETEP overhaul. And also for you to gain ideas for utilizing the ETEP as a strategic planning document, and also to feel prepared to proceed with a comprehensive ETEP overhaul when needed. And if you are new to ETEPs or need a refresher, we'll be covering just a few of the basics today, but because most GAP recipients have an ETEP in place and likely need to perform an overhaul on it very soon, we wanted to focus on the steps of updating and utilizing the original document. However, there is a slide at the end of the presentation that includes resources for further reading about the history and context of ETEPs. And in addition to the resources slide, you can download this presentation and a couple of additional handouts from this session by clicking on the Details tab and scrolling down to find the uploaded documents. So with that, let's move on to why are we drafting ETEPs in the first place? And ultimately, ETEPs are required in order to receive GAP funding. And arrayed around this are the intentions behind requiring these ETEPs, one being to identify intermediate and long-term tribal environmental priorities and goals that align with EPA authorities. These ETEPs are used each year when developing GAP work plans and budgets by both the project officer and the environmental director. And they are intended to be a living, usable document for both tribes and the EPA as environmental partners in planning, for use in planning and guiding our work. So now that we know why we're drafting the ETEPs, let's answer the question of why are we talking about updates and overhauls? Why and when do they need to be updated? And it's because the ETEPs have a specific range of time that they cover. In this example here, the range of time is from fiscal year 2018 through 2021. And so it's reached its expiration date and needs a comprehensive overhaul of the 4 documents that make up an ETEP in order to reset this time frame. And ETEPs expire after 4 to 5 years. Willard will cover that a little bit more later. And, the date in which the ETEP is valid is located on the cover memo, which is one of the 4 documents that make up the ETEP. And with focusing on the practical aspects of updating the ETEP, we wanted to be sure to make the distinction between an annual ETEP review and update and the comprehensive ETEP overhaul. With the idea that it's a living, dynamic document, it follows that the tribe may wish to make changes before the required overhaul. Many GAP recipients review and update their ETEP annually. This is an optional activity that can be included in a tribe's GAP work plan. It may already be included in yours. And some examples here of reasons that you may want to make updates to your ETEP are if a new regulated facility is added, such as a new gas station, which has an underground storage tank, and this may have been constructed since the last ETEP. If there are new environmental priorities, for example, if the tribe wants to begin climate change work and this wasn't reflected in the previously drafted ETEP cover memo. If additional land is added to trust, a tribe may want to do an environmental assessment of these new properties and have them included in the TEP. Or if a new EPA grant is awarded, this would be an example of a new EPA program activity that would be included in the areas of involvement, such as a new wetlands grant or brownfields grant. And if you think an ETEP update is needed, you can communicate this with your project officer. They can give you guidance on annual updates. If this activity isn't already included in the tribe's GAP work plan, you may be able to negotiate adding this in a future work plan. And looking again at these bullets, the new regulated facilities, environmental priorities, additional land, and also the EPA grants, you'll see that these correspond with the 4 elements that make up an ETEP. So let's do a quick overview of these 4 components before getting into the details of a comprehensive ETEP overhaul. The Tribal Environmental Plan, or the TEP, this is a strategic plan that identifies tribal environmental priorities and is developed by the tribe. The areas of involvement lists the statutory programs EPA is working on with a tribe and lists the federal environmental programs EPA implements in Indian country. And this is originally generated by the EPA. The regulated facilities list is a compilation of information from EPA databases showing regulated facilities and environmental information, and it is also originally generated by the EPA. Lastly, the cover memo summarizes the tribe's environmental priorities and areas where EPA engagement intersect. The cover memo is prepared jointly by the tribe and the EPA. And now I am going to turn it over to Willard, who's going to cover in more detail the comprehensive ETEP overhaul.
Thank you, Jeanette. So there will come a time when the previous ETEP's duration, 4 years for a GAP standalone grant, or if it's a GAP in the PPG, that ETEP has a 5-year duration. Once that period has ended, we expect our tribes to come in and develop a new ETEP to cover the next 4 or 5 years. So that's what is meant by an overhaul. And that means all the previous documents that Jeanette alluded to will have to be updated. The TEP, the regulated facilities documents, areas involvement document, and the ETEP cover memo. Now, what's really important, is that we want to make sure that changing environmental conditions and new priorities are reflected in this update, or I should say major overhaul. And most of your heavy lift as you update your existing ETEP would be in the TEP, the Tribal Environmental Plan, as you do the additional analysis. And even more important, of course, is what will be the new that's being built and what are the new program priorities you want to include in the cover memo. It's really the ETEP cover memo that we will be working with you on that we want to focus on. We realize that some of your previous ETEP priorities are long-term, such as waste management and climate change. As an example, they may carried over into the new ETEP cover memo with some nuances and some tweaks. But in the overhaul ETEP cover memo, we do expect new priorities or at least new areas of development as you expand your environmental programs. Again, your TEP analysis will lead you in that direction, but we see the ETEP cover memo as a blend of carried over activities from the previous ETEP and possibly some new priorities. And it's this ETEP cover memo that all the GAP project officers will look at as we begin to negotiate future work plans. Now, obviously, we'll refer to the TEP, but we'll really focus on what the priorities are on the ETEP cover memo. So now, once you put everything together, the various pieces of the ETEP, we do want some form of tribal concurrence or acknowledgement that the tribal government has blessed this major overhaul of your ETEP. You could sign the cover memo, ETEP cover memo, which is an option. Some tribes choose not to sign the ETEP cover memo. Then they decide instead to send a cover letter, either signed by some representative of the tribal government, just to give us some acknowledgement that's not just a product. The ETEP's not just a product of the environmental department, but there's some buy-in by tribal leadership, whether it be the tribal administrator or the tribal chair or another designated representative that signs this cover letter. Again, you have options and stuff. So the various pieces do involve a lot of time. And I do think that most tribes may also take time as they update their tribal environmental plan. We realize that the tribal environmental plan main focus should be EPA related programs, but the ETEP is supposed to be a comprehensive strategic plan, and there are environmental issues that fall outside of EPA programs, and the TEP update or the overhaul can continue to include issues of interest to the tribe, but again, outside EPA programs would, for example, it could be cultural resources protection, clean energy projects, agricultural activities, land use impacts. They overlap in some environmental impacts. So it's proper to focus on EPA programs, but still to have this touch on these other areas of concern that are important to the tribe. So what I just summarized have a lot of moving pieces with the different components. And now I want to turn it back to Jeanette, who will talk about her experience as a project with her grantee in putting these pieces together. Jeanette?
Thank you, Willard. Yes, I'd like to take the opportunity to just talk through the process a little bit, as I have worked with a few environmental directors on the comprehensive ETEP overhaul. And to talk through that, I'm going to return back to this slide with the 4 components. And while updating or doing the overhaul on these 4 pieces of the ETEP is simple, it isn't necessarily easy because, as Willard mentioned, it is a lot of moving parts, and it does take quite a bit of collaboration with your project officer. And I just want to be sure you have a good idea of how much time goes into it as you're planning to write this into your future work plans. So for the TEP, this is still, for the comprehensive ETEP overhaul, this is still developed by the tribe, but it may not be as heavy of a lift for this overhaul. And that's because you have an existing TEP to work with. And additionally, it may not need to be completely rewritten because of this, but also if the tribe has been actively reviewing the TEP annually and making revisions along the way, this component may not take a lot of work. And in fact, it might be in good shape by the time the overhaul needs to happen. But while the TEP may or may not require a full rewrite, it is, however, required for the other 3 documents to be updated during the overhaul, and for the ETEP to get a new expiration date. For the areas of involvement, this was originally generated by the EPA, and in this case, the project officer will discuss with the tribe whether any updates are needed. That's to say if any new grants have been initiated with the EPA that should be added to the ETEP. And any of these updates will be confirmed by the relevant EPA programs. For the regulated facilities list, this is a little different in that it was originally generated by the EPA, but for the overhaul, the project officer will ask the environmental director to review and make any updates that they are aware of. Once this is done, it'll be returned to the project officer so that any changes can be reviewed and confirmed by EPA program staff. And lastly, the cover memo. This is the same in that it is still developed jointly, but different project officers and environmental directors may approach it in different ways. So for example, they may decide to have a call together and draft this together while on the call. Or it could be that the project officer initiates creating a first draft by using the updated tribal environmental priorities and also filling in where EPA engagement intersects with those priorities. Or it could be initiated by the environmental director where they do a first draft using the updated priorities and hand it off to the project officer who will then add the EPA portion. Any of these ways can work for drafting the cover memo as long as both parties concur on the final product. And as Willard said, to get tribal concurrence on this as well. Once all of the documents are completed and concurrence from tribal leadership is noted, the new ETEP update will be complete and it will have a new time frame that it is valid for, and that'll be noted on the cover memo. And again, I'm going to turn it over to Willard, who's going to go over an example of a work plan that contains an ETEP overhaul.
Yes, and you actually will have available to this handout or this document, which is basically a GAP work plan component on how to do a major overhaul. It's very similar to the original commitments to develop the first ETEP, the different pieces. What I'd like to emphasize that when you see a template, the key is the dates that are proposed is subject to negotiations, the due dates, because there are so many pieces to the ETEP. We realize that any schedule in a work plan component will have to reflect your own develop your TEP, your update, all talk internally with your tribal leadership, tribal members, different departments within tribal units to get a sense of how you want to update your ETEP. So by all means, if you need more time to prepare for tribal council, let your project officer know. So these dates, if you see a proposed work plan is subject to negotiations, it's up to you to specify a schedule that's suitable for your tribal needs. So, and the next slide is just to talk about the only wrinkle that's very different from your first ETEP when you was developed 4 years ago is that this time, since it's an existing document, we want you to take the first attempt to update the regulated facilities document. Permitted facilities, whether it be a wastewater treatment, underground storage tank, or a wastewater treatment facility. If you have any of those, we want you to take, the first attempt to update it, give it to your project officer, who will then send it off to our various program staff in air, water, and waste to confirm that the data that you update is accurate. So that's the only wrinkle that we want you to do the update of that document. I also want to acknowledge that the regulated facilities document just captured EPA permitted facilities and other information. I also want to acknowledge that a lot of tribes are surrounded by activities, businesses, and permitted facilities that are under local or state jurisdiction that sit right at the boundaries, near tribal land. So an underground storage tank on county land may leak and may have an impact on tribal land. So it's appropriate to capture those type of facilities in your TEP, your tribal environmental plan. You can include that information and do the analysis of other facilities under state local jurisdiction that are close enough to have some sort of environmental impact. So just keep that in mind. But the regulated facilities document itself is just, again, a summary of federal type facilities where it may include a permit or other federal type of responsibility. Now, me and Jeanette gave you a good grounding on, again, the pieces on what we're asking for. I'd like to turn it over to Sarah, from a tribal perspective, how she uses her ETEP in practice and working with EPA as well. Sarah?
Thank you, Willard. Good afternoon, everybody. I am really happy to show you parts of Big Valley's ETEP, which we finalized in 2018. So it's getting ready for an overhaul itself. What you see on the slide here is the front page of it. And I'm going to go into it and show you our table of contents, and we're going to go over some things in our surface water program that is in our ETEP, because I wanted to show you how we use the ETEP to organize our environmental protection programs. As was stated earlier, there are things that we've put in our ETEP that are not necessarily covered by EPA programs or gap funding. However, these are still environmental priorities of the tribe, and so we put it all in one place. All right, next slide, please. So here's a portion of the table of contents of our ETEP. I find it really helpful to have a table of contents in a document. It's really easy to add when you're doing a Word document. Because you can also click on a section and go straight to it in your document. Our ETEP is well over 100 pages. I know other folks' ETEPs, other tribes' ETEPs are different and don't necessarily have the level of detail, and that's exactly how the tribe wanted it, and it's perfect as it is. We went into further detail, and as I mentioned, tried to put a lot of different things in it so we could have our strategic planning for environmental protection all in one spot. So this, so looking at this beginning part of the table of contents of our ETEP, you can see that we have a section on the background. So we have our introduction section on the background of the tribe and of the tribal lands, and then going into administration. The background includes land use information. It identifies all our existing documentation and all our existing environmental regulations, and then it also lists our environmental assessments. So we'll go into that a little bit in the next slide. If you could change the next slide, please. So here's some cut and paste from our actual ETEP. In the tribal land uses section, we go into, and each one of those items is a little drop down section within the ETEP, and so there's verbiage and narrative about each of those sections. But we decided to cover all the different land uses that are on the rancheria. Some of them are not necessarily under tribal government operations, but such as economic development. But it's still important to be tracking and documenting what's happening over there, what kind of chemicals are they storing, what kind of erosion issues are happening over there. So identifying the land uses has been very helpful for us to be able to just organize the information and document our land uses. We also go into the existing environmental regulations and land use plans. So we list all of our regulations, environmental regulations, and we don't have a lot, it's really not that many, but it's good to be able to list them and to write a blurb about each one. And then we also list all of our environmental studies and assessments. And, over time, I've been working for the tribe for 20 years. So, it's kind of fortunate because, it's easy to kind of track that stuff. But when, if you're new for your tribe and you're just starting to compile this type of information, just put together whatever you can find. And at least it's a start, and that means 2 or 3 years from now, at least you'll have that on a list, and it's really helpful. But we were able to go back all the way to the 90s, and for our environmental studies, every time we have a biological assessment, a cultural resource assessment, it's all listed here in the environmental studies and assessments section of the ETEP. All right, next slide, please. So the next sections in Big Valley's ETEP are the tribal programs and priorities. And these were the tribe's current environmental priorities when the ETEP was first developed in 2018. So I'd just like to list, or read out to you. It was surface water, groundwater, air, solid waste, emergency response and site remediation, chemical safety and pollution prevention, and cultural resources. And these, it's not necessarily that we have full-blown programs on each of these, but these were programs and priorities that, when we asked the question, what needs to be protected and what is threatened, there were obviously there had been some work done on all of these programs that are listed here, or there were concerns about them. So we in developing our ETEP, got all of these got all of these ideas and priorities down, and started to pull together the ETEP based on these sections. As Willard and Jeanette has mentioned earlier, it's a living document, and so in our overhaul we might be adding some. I don't think we'll be removing any, but certainly adding some as things change, and there's some other priorities that need to be focused on. Next slide, please. So in order to pull together a list like that, let's say that there's a lot of new people, and the tribe is saying, the tribal council is saying, can you, check on, or, we think that there's some issues with this. Can you check on this a little bit more? It's important to identify those issues. And there's a lot of sources out there, of course, starting with tribal and local knowledge of things that have changed, things that need to be protected, and things that you want to focus on in your ETEP. So I've listed that, elders and tribal programs and just the known loss of species and the big changes that have happened. You can add, you'll be able to add to your program list of your ETEP by tackling that with the local knowledge within the tribe. You can also go to online sources to see, what the pollution issues are in your area. Places such as EnviroMapper, the Toxic Release Inventory, and even your own regulated facilities list that you had to that you're pulling together for the ETEP. These are places where you can find information about local pollution that's already being tracked. There's also just local actions in your watershed and in your region. TMDLs, the total maximum daily load, is a component of the Clean Water Act when uses are impaired because of water pollution. So TMDLs are a great source of seeing what the pollution is in your watershed. Local resource management groups and environmental action groups also, will have some concepts of what the issues are in your area. And then in California, we're really fortunate because California really tracks a lot of this stuff really well. And you can find information in Cal EnviroScreen and OEHA's Climate Change Indicators report, and even looking at fish consumption guidelines for the type of pollution that's impacting fish in your water bodies. So use multiple sources to identify issues for your ETEP. And as I've stated there, think broadly and go outside of GAP and EPA to identify these issues and to develop your programs and priorities list. Okay, next slide, please. So now I'm going to dive into surface water within Big Valley's ETEP. And you can see that, again, going into tribal programs and priorities, for surface water, and actually for all of our tribal programs and priorities of the ETEP, we have the following sections. A background section on the program, so surface water background section, goals and objectives of the program, a list of the existing tribal regulations that exist to help with that program, any issues, the issues of that of surface water, and a list of the tribal programs that are addressing surface water issues for the tribe. And so we do that for each program priority. And so it helps really organize ideas and information and, past work. And then we go into indicators and we identify EPA or specific Big Valley indicators for each program, diving into it in a near-term, midterm, and long-term approach of what we can accomplish soon versus what we can accomplish and what we hope to accomplish down the road. Okay, next slide, please. So looking at the goals and objectives of surface water, we wanted to create measurable goals and objectives that will create progress in our program development. And so here you see the goals, the goal of the Water Resources Program, and this is all within the Environmental Department, is to take actions necessary to ensure the water quality and quantity is such that tribal members can safely use the water in all ways that promote their economic vitality and cultural heritage. So what you see here in the objectives list are just some of the things that we've identified at Big Valley is an important part of reaching our goals to have a strong water resource protection program at Big Valley. So that includes appropriate monitoring to protect tribal beneficial uses, evaluation of the data, documentation, regular attendance and participation in local and regional meetings, having the tribal youth involved, the study of toxics in fish, and other tribal beneficial use work. So those are some of the objectives that we have for the surface water program. All right, next slide, please. Now we're going to, let me give some detail about the issues and existing regulations portion of our surface water program. So in 4.2.3 on the slide, for issues for surface water, the surface water program of our ETEP, we've identified mercury contamination, and you can see that there's a little kind of drop down arrow for each of those sections. So there is a narrative about each of these things, and we've listed the things that we're aware of back in 2018, things that we are working on, things that we thought we should be working on, just to put it all in one spot. And then you can see a list of our existing tribal regulations for the surface water program. And that includes even the tribal gaming ordinance, because there are some things in the tribal gaming ordinance about water quality. So there's so it's not a lot of regulations, but it certainly addresses much of what we have going on. And by putting it in this way in your ETEP, you can also over time identify if there are other regulations that are needed. All right, next slide, please. So then we identified indicators as milestones in the progress of our program. So a timeline of indicators can help break up your planned milestones, because we're all so busy, and being able to put it together in one spot and to see the progression of something is just really helpful. So we have near-term, midterm, and long-term indicators for the surface water program. And again, we do this for each of our program priorities of the ETEP. So next slide, please. So here are some near-term indicators. We identified indicators from the GAP guidance as near-term to address current priorities and reachable goals. So in the checkbox part of the slide, you can see some of our indicators: training and acquire baseline knowledge about Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act. So it's not all about, so Safe Drinking Water Act is a drinking water thing, but if you're getting your drinking water from surface water, you're going to be focusing on Clean Water Act as well as Safe Drinking Water Act. Another near-term indicator is analyzing the water quality issues impacting the tribe and evaluating water pollution control options. The slide that you see, or the graphic you see on the left, is a fish, one of our fish studies we've done of cyanotoxin levels in fish of Clear Lake. And we've highlighted the ones that are above the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessments action levels, suggested action levels for fish consumption. So, by doing these studies, it is helping us in our understanding and knowledge of what the pollution issues are and how to build our program more. Okay, next slide, please. And we'll move to midterm indicators. We identified indicators from the GAP guidance as midterm to address next step priorities and reasonable goals. Might not be happening this year, but in the year or two, a few years down the road. So, but they're all linked. So here are a few: identified water resources and associated environmental and human health issues. The human health part we're really working on hard these days, because that's really a key component of whether your uses are protected. Establishing outreach programs, that's been difficult during the pandemic, but still needs to happen. And then submitting a treatment as a state for EPA for an approved water quality standards program. That picture there is a fish ladder that we're going to be taking out through some local funding, and this will help the Clear Lake Hitch be able to, it's basically a fish barrier. So we are, looking at the broader perspectives of the program in terms of surface water. Next slide, please. Moving into the long-term indicators. So we identified indicators from the GAP guidance as long-term to address future plan priorities and goals. Now, these could change over time as things change. But we've established, or we plan to establish a program to develop TMDLs and other water quality-based planning efforts. That's part of the GAP guidance. That's one of the indicators in the GAP guidance. So, we find it extremely helpful to look at these indicators list, because it helps us give us a roadmap of where we could go with our program if we have a mature water quality program, and using GAP funds to help get there. And this picture here is one of Clear Lake. It's obviously not clear. It looks like pea soup there because there's a lot of cyanobacteria and toxin levels above the danger level. Okay, next slide, please. So, this is probably kind of blurry. I apologize. So the next ETEP section we have is the regulated facilities. And we find that very helpful. And we did a lot of work actually in kind of unpacking the regulated facilities list. It helps identify things to watch. So first and foremost, regulated facilities are pollution generators. That's how we look at them, because they are holding on to some sort of, they have a permit to do, and they're regulated because it has something to do with pollution. So these are facilities that store or emit contaminants to land, air, or water that could impact tribal resources. So again, really important to watch. This is a screenshot of part of our ETEP where the facility is listed. We list the environmental or the data source so that because we can actually go into the data source online to get information about whether there are any violations, whether there's something wrong with the permit, etc. So the regulated facilities list is really important because it lists how these facilities are tracked and regulated. And as Willard mentioned, there also could be tribal facilities on this list as well. So these are important to know what's in your watershed, because if any of these leak or the emission to air, it could be impacting the tribe. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, actually, go back to that slide. I just want to point out one thing. Sorry. At the bottom of the spreadsheet, you can see that there's tabs and it's very blurry, but we broke it down. We looked in the whole county, and we broke it down by not zip code, but basically areas of the county, so that if we have tribal members in those areas, we have information about the regulated facilities in those areas. And also, since we're on a huge lake, so many things flow into the lake. So it's really important to know regulated facilities throughout the watershed, because what they're doing is something that could impact the lake, which then the currents could take that water quality to us, and then the tribes are impacted. Next slide, please. We also developed a user guide for current and future staff for the regulated facility list. It's not really any big deal. It was just an explanatory thing, and you can see my good friend Daniel Lucas, who was working for the tribe at the time, who is now at Berkeley, and finishing his math degree, put this regulated facility list together for us, where we could just use it to understand the regulated facility list of our ETEP. So we go into a description of the database where you can actually find information about each of those regulated facilities. And it's just helpful for, like I said, current and future staff to be able to really use the regulated facility list. Next slide, please. So I guess the two more slides I would like to show you. And the first is, so we finally go into the appendices of our ETEP. And you can see there's 16 appendices. And those are, all the documents are attached there. So it's really helpful to be able to look at the ordinances, our integrated solid waste management plan that's part of it, our spill prevention countermeasure and control plan, like all of these things that have to do with environmental pollution or mitigating for it. In the slide on the section on the right-hand side where it says number 6, environmental review for HUD houses, that is some detail about that's part of Appendix 16, assessments and study. So you can see that we actually go into just a little bit of detail, just a blurb about each of our studies or assessments that we've done over the years, and it puts it all together there, including some things that we've identified regarding those programs. So this is the ETEP can become the place where your important documents are tracked, how your environmental protection program is built and implemented. Next slide, please. And this is my final slide within my presentation. So in updating our ETEP, we are reviewing any changes to priorities and our programs. We're going to be updating our regulated facilities list, adding to our assessments and studies list, because we certainly have done more since 2018. And then indicators that have been met will be moved to a newly created accomplished indicators section. But we all know that conditions and priorities could require additional work on that indicator. It's not going to be the last of that indicator, but it's one that we've made progress on. And we will be adding new indicators as appropriate. That's the graphic you see there is just one of our emergency response things that we did in 2020, where we brought the community together to go over a disaster ready guide and learn how to be better prepared for wildfires. So the main thing is that we want to build on our accomplishments and grow a proactive program and a series of proactive programs within the environmental department for the tribe and be engaged with the tribe, so we're all moving forward to protect the environment. Thank you.
Okay, so that's it for your slides, right, Sarah?
Yes.
All right. Thank you folks for participating in the chat while our presentation was going on, and just a few wrap-up slides here. As I mentioned earlier, we have a resources slide here, and one of the items being the gap guidance, which I know project officers always talk about and encourage folks to read, but there is a really nice section in there about ETEPs, as well as in the gap frequently asked questions. There's a link to that. And there's also a link to our Region 9 Tribal Programs website where you can find some sample ETEPs. And lastly, and this addresses one of the questions, I think, is that you can download this presentation as well as a couple of handouts through this session. So if you go to the what is it, the details tab, I think, and scroll down a bit, you should find the uploaded sessions. However, I don't think the presentation will be without the blur that you saw, or the text is still going to be small, so I don't know how that'll show up. And we also have our presenter contacts, so please feel free to get in touch with any of us if you do have questions about ETEPs and about utilizing your ETEP. And lastly, we wanted to save some time for questions. There have been a couple in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the slideshow, and we can go back to having our videos on that to address some of these questions.
This is Willard. I see one question from Donna. Are the regulated facilities lists on and off the reservation as long as it impact tribal resources. Yes, I think that we do want to give the tribe the opportunity to capture facilities that may impact their environment. Now, the way most ETEPs are written is that our initial template of a regulated facilities list only captures federal facilities that has what we call under our jurisdiction that we issue a small drinking water systems that have control of, where we actually do inspections and permit those type of facilities. Underground storage tank on tribal land, EPA has jurisdiction unless there's some unique arrangement where we give program delegation to tribes. Clean Air Act permit and wastewater treatment facilities. So that's the traditional list. That's the template that you saw in your original ETEP. What most tribes done that we would encourage is that whatever document that you want to create, and most tribes put it in their tribal environmental plan. I think Sarah had a more comprehensive list where she has both the federal and the state and local. We just want to acknowledge that if you think that within your tribal lands, but there are adjacent non-tribal entities, within just outside your boundaries, whether it be an air pollution facilities or a underground storage tank that's right on your border, and if it leaks, it would impact. You're perfectly fine including it in the tribal environmental plan. And if in fact you want to put it in quote unquote the regulated facilities document, I would just make it an addendum to the federal regulated facilities, because it's easy for us, because eventually we'll look at it. We only will cross-check the federal regulated facilities, and we'll just look at that piece because we have our own database to confirm that the facilities that you've updated in the regulated facilities document is accurate compared to our database. So for ease of purpose, we just want to have the two lists separate, but you want to integrate the list, just make sure that you could describe it as an addendum of state and local facilities. However, so you have different options, but we do encourage a comprehensive listing of all facilities that may impact your reservation. Hopefully that would answer your question. Yeah. Let's see, is there anything else?
I haven't seen anything come through. I was just scrolling through the chat to see if we missed any. Here's another one. How do EPA and tribes work to reduce or mitigate pollution impacts from off the res?
That's a tough one. First of all, now there are two things. It's a jurisdictional issue, so this is it's going to be ongoing, a potentially difficult issue. Now, you as a tribal environmental director hopefully have some access to whether it be the regional water control board or the local air pollution control agency or the county. Hopefully that you have the opportunity to engage, whether it be some regional meetings or maybe if in fact a local air district has a permit up for either renewal or under consideration, that you can engage as an environmental director. But there's a larger issue. Let's just say, again, was it Ryan? I may, you can give me more detail. But let's just say if it's already a permitted facility and it's an air pollution source, and now it's not even an EPA source. It could be let's just say for the sake of argument, it's the South Coast Air Pollution Control District. They issue a permit in Riverside County. But it's they're increasing their emissions and stuff. You can just ask EPA. Maybe there's an environmental justice argument you're making that the air pollution's already bad. If in fact there's an expansion of a particular facility, I need to know more specific. But EPA has delegated most of our program to state and local. The problem is that the permit may be operating fine. And as Sarah alluded to, they're permitted for a reason. They're allowed to release pollution. But I think some tribes or environmental justice community may make the argument that there's already an environmental burden. We should find a way to control currently permitted facility. We can have that argument. You can talk to your project officer. And if in fact, using my air example, if in fact it's an air pollution source, maybe your project, talk to your project officer, talk to our air pollution staff, and we may get a hold of the air district. Now, without knowing more example of what, if there's a particular facility that you have in mind that's impacting your res, whether it be a wastewater treatment facility or air pollution or industrial facilities with the air permit, we can maybe tease it out some more by contact your project officer, or you could even brainstorm with me, because I think it's a local jurisdiction, but EPA may have some limited leverage, because we also give not only gap grants, we give tens of millions of dollars to air pollution control agencies as well as a water district. So we have that same type of leverage potentially. Oh, there it is. Our concerns: pesticides, water, and dust pollution from farmers on. Okay. That is doubly tough, because we were talking about maybe area sources, would be pesticides drift or maybe runoff. Again, we would want you to, of course, you may already try engage the either regional water control board or the local agricultural board to see if in fact, they can be good neighbors, that if in fact pesticides drift is an issue, that they can give you a spraying schedule, or they can maybe share with you information of what level of pesticides and the toxicity or the content of the pesticide they're using. At least share that information. And if in fact they're not sharing that information, pesticides people talk to the California agency or the local agricultural. There are different ways to do that. Yeah. So Ryan, you can talk to me or your GAP project officer. Maybe we could have a joint call. I'm sorry, who was it? Yeah, Ryan McIntosh. If maybe we can brainstorm, but you can either try to initiate discussion yourself, or I and your project officer can brainstorm what's a proper approach, and we could bring in our pesticide staff. And before we contact the state of California or the local board, we want to know more first. Okay. So feel free to contact me. And again, chin.willard@epa.gov, and maybe we can schedule a session with your GAP PO as well. Mm-hmm.
And Sarah offered some assistance in the chat as well. Sarah, did you have any input
please, yeah,
from that? Or shall we move?
Just I noticed this from Santa Rosa Rancheria in California. So this is where you want to develop monitoring programs, to be able to show data as well. So having a surface water or an air, a pesticide drift, we have pesticide drift program at Big Valley, and pesticide monitoring in runoff from local ag. So I feel your pain. It's great to get data on it, and look forward to talking with you further about it as you wish.
Yeah, and I need to confess, I'm not that familiar with our pesticides program, but I don't know if in fact, whether we can maybe enhance your capability to do this type of monitoring. So we can talk further, and as we can bring in our pesticides people too. It is I think it's more of a competitive program, the pesticides. Yeah, but that funding is available. But EPA can maybe do some sort of baseline assessment too. But then, of course, you need to have state and local and private operators somewhat cooperative to give you the data. So I think we need to make sure that we could help you with the planning, but also what's the next step? Or maybe we kind of know what's out there. I think what Ryan is, how can we make them stop or reduce the level of release? I think that's the what he's trying to get at, and whether EPA can help them, given that these permits been issued, the pollutants have been released in the environment. What do you do? I think that's where we're going to have to grapple with the next level of discussion.
Well, I just want to say that, pesticides have to be applied according to the label, which states that it should be applied in a way that it's supposed to stay on the intended target. So when drift is happening, if that means they're applying it in a manner that is not in accordance with the label, and that is a FIFRA violation. So if you have data on that, in terms of drift and runoff and things like that, it's really helpful. And it can be like a, way to get it to stop real quick. That's what we did over at Big Valley.
No, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. That's a very powerful statement to make. That could be, and we don't know enough, but that's just something to be aware of. That's great. Yeah.
And it looks like our session is winding down pretty quickly. We have about 5 minutes left, but I know people have to get to their next session as well. Maybe we can wait just a few more seconds to see if any other questions come through. And then if not, we will conclude.
Yes.
Thank you again to everybody for attending.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Sarah, for just taking your time to give, a tribal perspective and really, how you're actually implementing and achieving your water goals. I love the example of the surface water, program development. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you both for all your work in this arena. It's really appreciated.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I'm glad everyone can participate.
Bye. And please reach out to your project officer if you have any questions about your ETEP and stuff. Okay.
All
Bye,
right.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.